Good afternoon. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to the October edition of our Cornerstone webinars. My name is Justin Goddard, and I serve as the Program Officer for National Leadership and Education here at Community Progress. Cornerstone is our monthly webinar series that equips participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's Cornerstone, we are joined by both Zachary Brannigan and Ted Lind of the Saginaw Basin Land Conservancy. Zachary Brannigan has served as the SBLC Executive Director since 2012 and has been responsible for the rapid growth and new initiatives that have helped the SBLC expand its impact on community development and quality of life throughout the Saginaw region. His leadership and prior experience as an urban planner were the catalyst for SBLC's cultural shift in establishing key municipal partnerships and thinking outside the traditional frameworks of where a conservation-based land trust operates. Ted Lind serves as a Director of Community Conservation and is a veteran of the United States Army, having achieved the rank of captain and serving a tour of duty in Afghanistan. He is a graduate of the Northern Michigan University and Saginaw Valley State University and leads many of the organization's community-based projects, including their multi-year effort in blight reduction and vacant land activation in Saginaw. Before turning it over to our presenters, I want to mention that we will allow time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your browser and send it to both the webinar host and all panelists. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to message the Community Progress host or send an email to Justin Goddard at jgoddard@communityprogress.net. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zachary and Ted.
Okay, thanks a lot, Justin. This is Zachary, and we're very pleased that you're here today, and we appreciate it very much, and we hope that you learned something. So don't hesitate to give us some questions, and we'll bring you right along here. All right, I'm looking for the. Let's see
Hey, Zachary.
Yeah.
If you go to the top of your screen, you want to click the down arrow. There's like a thing that'll come up that'll say viewing webinar slides.
There we go. Okay. All right.
There you go.
All right. Good. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Sorry about that. All right. Well, let's get started a little bit. Again, my name is Zachary. I'm from the Saginaw Basin Land Conservancy. I've been here about 8 years or so. And, you know, what we've done is kind of come up with an unusual partnership with a variety of different partners, including government agencies and other nonprofit organizations, community groups, faith-based communities, a pretty broad umbrella, actually, and to tackle a very complicated issue that you're all very familiar with. And a little unconventionally, you know, we're a land trust, and we are typically tasked with protecting land in the face of aggressive development or, you know, some threat to the natural world. And in our case now in Saginaw, we're really kind of in the opposite business, which is trying to identify opportunities for surplus land and what to do with surplus land. So our land stewardship function is what led us to this situation. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our story and who we are, and then I'm going to talk about our relationship with Saginaw and set the stage for what we call the Pollinator Project, which is our blight remediation program in Saginaw. And then after a little bit more context and understanding a little bit of why we're doing what we're doing, I'm going to hand it over to Ted, and he's going to dive a little bit deeper on things. So the Saginaw Basin Land Conservancy, we're about 22 years old at this point. We were formed essentially to protect wetland communities and to work on riparian issues, primarily geared around waterfowl habitat and around the protection of our watershed for the purpose of making cleaner water in Saginaw Bay, which is the largest bay and the largest sub-watershed of the Great Lakes. So if you're not from our area and you're not familiar with exactly where we are, we're kind of between the thumb and the forefinger of Michigan being the mitten. So that gives you a little bit of context for right there at that the base of that bay. And Saginaw Bay is a very shallow and slow-moving bay and has a very complicated environmental history. So there's a lot of things going on there. Our mission statement was always somewhat vague and somewhat general. Like a lot of conservation groups, it was something along the lines of conserving land and water resources for the purpose of quality of life in the Saginaw Bay watershed. So naturally, that opened up a Pandora's box of potential projects and things we could do. And we, over the last few years, have really narrowed it down and concentrated on a few things through a strategic plan rewrite that had a lot to do, honestly, with some of the work we're doing in Saginaw, and I'll get to that. But our current mission statement, recently adopted this year, is to take action at the intersection of people and nature, elevate landscapes for the benefit of all, and provide leadership in conservation. And we'll hit on each of these three throughout the course of this webinar. But in short, taking action at the intersection of people and nature, this is meant to bring to the forefront our responsibility to consider people and communities first in our work. One of the themes through a lot of the presentation is going to be that, we really are focused on the environmental justice, the social equity of the programs that we're doing and in the communities that we serve. So that's kind of what's driving us to stay involved here. Naturally, we're a conservation group. We're concerned with the elevation of landscapes for nature. However, where we started out, kind of thinking that vacant land would be an excellent opportunity to help the population of pollinators, we really found out later on that this was a much more complicated and broader topic area than we thought it was going to be. And then providing leadership in conservation is sort of a theme that you'll see throughout here. And honestly, just by getting involved with organizations like the Center for Community Progress and that, we believe that we're doing that. There really is a fundamental change going on in the land trust industry at the moment, where the larger federal resources for permanent land protection and in some ways the large philanthropic resources for permanent land protection have started to go other directions to deal with other environmental and societal issues. And acquiring very large tracts of land for permanent land protection is more and more challenging. And as a result, land trusts around the country, there's about 1,600 land trusts, over half of which are accredited land trusts. We are an accredited land trust to the Land Trust Alliance. Those 1,600 land trusts are in a lot of ways searching for identity and relevance. So in our case, for instance, we spent an awful lot of time working in remote areas, working on riparian buffer strips and conversions of old farm fields to wetlands. We have about 6,000 acres of land under our care and protection permanently, but we live in a colossal watershed. The Saginaw Bay watershed is 22 counties and is a large and complex community. So we really needed to identify some of the stuff that we were going to be focusing on. Here. So as far as who we actually are on the ground, our staff and structure, we're a permanent staff of 4. We have myself, Ted. We have an associate director, Lisa. We have a director of land protection, Trevor. And in the photograph on your screen, you'll see that we had a summer crew of as many as 5 or 6. This summer, we were at 10 at our full strength this summer. But we'll right size for the winter time down here. Now our summer crew is essentially finished for the year. So we are a 4-staff full-time group. Ted's primary responsibility is our community projects like the Pollinator Project and our Saginaw initiatives, whereas Trevor is primarily geared with maintaining our permanent land portfolio. So if you're not familiar with what a land trust is versus a land bank, I'll give you a really quick rundown that a land trust is an unusual nonprofit organization in that it is a nonprofit organization with a commitment to perpetuity. One of the things that sets us aside from other nonprofits is that from the very beginning, a land trust includes in its articles of incorporation a pledge to exist in perpetuity. So in the environmental movement and in the conservation movement, one of the fair criticisms, I would say, as a land trust community is that we're relatively slow to respond and relatively conservative in operation as a genre of nonprofit organization. And that is because of this permanence and this perpetual commitment. So you'll find a lot of land trusts are very phobic to risk, they're very phobic to trying new things, and they turn the battleship very slowly. And one of the things that sets us aside is that we're a much more activist style organization, really making interventions in land that is not ours and is not under permanent land protection. So it sort of sets us aside a little bit, and we find ourselves in this limbo area where we're interacting a lot with public agencies and nonprofits and groups that are dealing with things like vacant land, blight, and urban issues, and then also skirting kind of the relationship we have with the land trust community. And there's interest on both sides and kind of the work that we're doing to bridge these things. As I mentioned, our protected land portfolio, of the 22 counties we serve, it resides in 9 of those counties, and we focus primarily on the counties that are in and around the Saginaw Bay itself. So we're talking about coastal communities, kind of all surrounding Lake Huron there, and then up and down the I-75 corridor. I'm sure you're obviously familiar with Flint, Michigan. Saginaw, Michigan is just about a half an hour up the road from Flint, and that's where a lot of our work is. We are actually based in Bay City, which is the next community up the river and up the freeway, just before you start kind of exploring northern Michigan. So community-based projects is what brings us here, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. A few years ago, about 5 years ago now, there was a unique opportunity to pursue a $100,000 grant in our area, which is a relatively small community and one without huge philanthropic resources. A $100,000 grant for conservation work is an extraordinarily large grant. So we competed for this grant and were able to secure it. And we did so with a project we called the Outdoor Urban Recreation Initiative in Bay City, the community we serve. And the reason that we did this was that we started to do a lot of self-examination over our relevance and who are we helping. And as I had mentioned, our previous mission statement said that we were attempting to improve the quality of life in the watershed. However, we kind of felt like we weren't really having much of a direct relationship with people. And when I took this position, the organization was in a little bit of financial peril from an operations perspective. It was staffed by essentially one full-time person and a couple of part-time people. And it had exhausted funds that it had achieved through federal grants for permanent land protection, and found itself in a situation where there was very little community recognition for the organization, and philanthropic funds were very hard to come by. So payroll, things like that were getting to be kind of a worry. And when my predecessor left the organization, it was stable, but without a lot of opportunity and a little bit on the decline. So I was faced with the challenge. I was the only full-time employee. And as an urban planner, I'm an urban planner by trade. As my bio had mentioned, I kind of said, well, I need to start doing some consensus building and trying to understand relevance where the people are in the watershed. And the more that I did that, I realized that there was very little name recognition for us on the ground, and there was very little recognition of us doing something that was directly affecting people's lives where they were. So this unique opportunity, the Outdoor Urban Recreation Program grant, came at a very timely period in the organization's history. So this $100,000 grant we distributed over 4 projects. The concept was to have a turnkey set of several projects that would make a major impact across our small community, soup to nuts, top to bottom, left to right. And it included 4 projects. I'll give you a very brief rundown. One was Discovery Preserve, which now has a nature playground and pavilion and some other amenities. This was a county park that was operated by Bay County on a budget of $1,200 a year, $700 of which was used exclusively to rent a porta-john for the site. So there was only about $500 actually set aside for the maintenance of this 12-acre urban park, which included a large wetland complex in the middle of it, an open water wetland. So we pursued the relationship with the county and asked them if we could take it over. And ultimately, that's what happened. So we took it over. We've to date probably raised about $100,000 to renovate that park, rebrand it as Discovery Preserve, and it has become an ambassador landscape. And this was sort of a proof of concept whether or not anybody would care. And it has a parking lot on a very major commercial corridor, and it gave us a lot of new name recognition and people curious about the organization. So that had started. We were able to invest more in it as a result of the OUR project. We added 3 more projects at this time. Golson Nature Area is a City of Bay City-owned park, and that required some additional investment to kind of reset its natural condition, remove Phragmites and other invasives. We did that. Michigan Sugar Trails was the reclamation of a 30-acre vacant property on an island in the middle of the Saginaw River. Easily accessible to a large part of the community. It was sort of a site of illegal dumping, squatting, a lot of sort of criminal activity, minor criminal activity. We took it over and created a mountain bike park there, and that exists today. And the last one is the Bay City Rowing Center. We partnered with the City of Bay City and the Rowing Club, and we developed a new recreational approach to the water for people to get in and out of kayaks and other non-motorized watercraft on our river. So you can see that the one thing that these four things have in common is that none of them are associated with permanent land protected by the Land Conservancy. So this was sort of a kind of an alarming sea change for us in the community for those that knew us and started to raise some eyebrows in the philanthropic landscape around the region. So from there, the next natural kind of condition for us would be to sort of march towards Saginaw. And when we elected to start working in Saginaw, the one thing that we didn't want to do was to just, kind of superimpose our concepts of what would be a good project on the community. Saginaw is a community in far more distress than Bay City. It's a much more racially diverse and economically diverse community, much more economically depressed community, dealing with a lot more complicated and severe issues. Bay City is a little bit more intact even after sort of deindustrialization in our region. So rather than superimpose our will on the community, what we decided to do instead was to spend a year just asking questions, getting to know the community, and we called that process taking root. And what taking root in Saginaw was a series of workshops and open houses and just a deep dive into getting involved in the community, introducing ourselves and our capacity to the community, and then finding where we could serve as a tipping point partner to help partners around the community come up with, with interesting things that we would be able to help with and bring regional dollars into Saginaw. You can see from these maps here, Saginaw is a pretty complicated community. You can see on the west side and the east side in that first map on the left there in 1990, population density is relatively intact all over the community. That upper northeast area is, that's the home of the General Motors plant. And you can see the large white area in the bottom. There was another General Motors plant down there, and then also the Shiawassee National Wildlife Refuge. So that's why those areas are much lower in density. When you start to creep to the right, you can see in 2000 that the east side is starting to empty out a little bit. And by the time you get to the 2010 census, you can see that you have an extraordinary flight from the east side of Saginaw to the west side of Saginaw. And then honestly, if we had included the entire county, you could see that there's a large migration from the west side into the west side suburbs. So you had a predominantly African-American community on the east side and a predominantly white community on the west side. The white community, a lot of it diffused out into the suburbs, and the African-American community is more geographically spread over the entire community now. On the east side, today, the population that is left there is predominantly African-American. So you can see here from the minority population, this is as of the 2010 census, I'm sorry. You can just see the racial distribution there in the community. Might be a little hard to see if you're on a small screen, but the City of Saginaw's 2014 large landholders, that includes the land bank, and that pink color there is basically the vacant land owned by the land bank. So you can see what an extensive and comprehensive problem it is. There are 3,000 truly vacant lots in the city owned by the Saginaw County Land Bank, which doesn't sound like a huge number if you're from a major metropolitan area, but considering that our community is under 50,000 residents, it's a lot. So there's 5,000 vacant properties, 3,000 truly vacant, no homes. They spent, I don't know, we know for sure of at least $11.5 million in the last, 7 or 8 years with federal grants to demolish homes, removing about 3,000 homes. But what that left us with was this comprehensive vacant land use epidemic around the city. And a lot of things like this. This is a pretty common nightly news theme in our area, is residents upset with vacant land issues, illegal dumping. So after that process, we developed OUR Saginaw, and we were able to raise quite a bit more, probably about $700,000 or $800,000 in total. And very quickly, one was an outdoor recreational trail at our local university. Another one was a trail at the Children's Zoo, which we have here in the community, a millage-supported children's zoo. And that actually, there's a whole other sort of deep dive on that project, but that was a trail to activate some vacant land, but also to connect the zoo and a critical community park with a struggling neighborhood on the east side that didn't have access other than going around some railroad tracks or going on a very busy road. And the zoo trail is sort of a nice pastoral 2,000-foot-long trail that connected a critical neighborhood with a critical resource. The Janet H. Nash Riverfront Preserve is another one. This is a 2.5-acre dilapidated parking lot that we removed 6,000 cubic yards of material from, and ultimately created a wildflower prairie restoration project there right downtown. That project was several $100,000 in and of itself, and it is kind of the pearl on the necklace for us, and is a proof of concept of the last one here, which is the pollinator project. The pollinator project was our commitment to tackle the vacant land issue. When we did Taking Root in Saginaw, the first response out of almost everybody's mouth was the one thing you need to do something about is the vacant land epidemic in the city, the illegal dumping and the overgrowth of woody debris, vegetation, and obnoxious weeds, tall grass, things like that on these thousands of vacant lots. So the land bank had the resources to be mowing each and every one of these. The land bank was sort of similar to our organization, where it had a tremendous number of acres and properties, but little resources to take care of them. It used a federal grant to acquire and demolish those homes and put that portfolio together, but didn't have the resources for sort of that long range continuity and trying to get those properties back online. And so it was sort of a similar story to our organization, where we had 6,000 acres of land under protection and almost no name recognition in the community, giving us few resources to take care of those 6,000 acres. So we developed the pollinator project, and we brought in philanthropic partners from all over the region. And the concept, here's a couple of images I'll just quickly buzz through. This is the outdoor recreation trail. That's Ted on the left, the president of SBSU there in the center. And this was a nature trail network that we partnered with them on. This is the beginning of the zoo trail there. This is an outdoor classroom that's at the base of it. And then the trail extends behind there. You can sort of see on the left that there's a park right there. This is right behind me. I took this photograph, and behind me would be the parking lot for the zoo. Here's the zoo trail kickoff right there. And you can see it's not a paved trail, but it's a crushed aggregate, recycled aggregate trail. And here's Janet Nash herself, kind of humorously. She's the principal of the adjacent school that was right here. And the school owns the actual land underlying the Riverfront Preserve, and they decided to name it the Janet Nash Preserve. And when we announced that online, a lot of people said this is a remarkable way to remember her. She was incredible in the community, and what an important person she was, and I remember her. And then she commented on the thing and said, hey, just so everybody knows, I'm not actually dead yet, and not a memorial, and I'm looking forward to coming to the ribbon cutting, and it's a big honor. So she attended the ribbon cutting, became a large donor to the Land Conservancy, in fact, and has become our friend since then. But here she is with her husband, Jack, next to the sign bearing her name, and she walks her dogs there every day. You can see some of the stages here, and this is kind of a precursor to the pollinator project. You can see what it looked like in the upper left. There I am with Congressman Kildee. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Congressman Kildee because of his role at the Center for Community Progress. And here in the upper right corner is the preserve as it stood in its first growing season. And then in the lower right is what it looks like with the wildflower prairies in full bloom. And there's the largest bean tower in Michigan. You can kind of see in the background of these photos. And there's the Saginaw River right there. Downtown Saginaw is just on the other side. There's been some recent economic development there. And the feedback that we get is that we really did something special for the community, because rather than this new development overlooking the river in a vacant lot, now they're overlooking the river in this wildflower prairie restoration. So I'm going to hand it over to Ted at this point, and he's going to tell you a little bit deeper dive on exactly what the pollinator project is, why we do it, what it means to the community, and give us a little bit more detail. So I'm going to pass that along to Ted right now.
So as Zach said, at first glance, our idea with the pollinator project was, as a conservation organization, Saginaw had a significant amount of vacant property and not a great plan for what to do with that property after the homes had been taken down. So we said, well, we know something about managing property and restoring wetlands and wildflower meadows and things like that. And at the same time, there was a lot of research showing that pollinator habitat nationally was under some stress. So we thought, well, let's put the two things together. Let's use this vacant land as an asset in the city and repurpose some of it into pollinator habitat and do some good there. So that's what we started out doing. We would start out by removing some of the overgrown vegetation and down limbs and things like that. As Zach said, City of Saginaw is stressed a bit in its resources to maintain this property. In 2016, they made the decision as a city to no longer mow any of their vacant property. Right now, what their mowing crews will do is they mow the right-of-way strip between the sidewalk and the curb, and then they do one mower pass. They do a mow strip just down the front of the lot, and that is their mowing technique on every single vacant lot in the city. And as you saw on the map that Zach showed earlier, there's 3,000 lots in a community that's not that large. So what you have in the remainder of the lot is, a very overgrown and kind of wild environment. Really doesn't look like the type of place that most people would want to live next to. And that's kind of where we said we could come in and potentially repurpose that land with pollinator habitat and create something that looked a bit more intentional and something that was a little easier for residents to look at. So in a perfect world, this is a picture actually of one of our lots in the city. This is from State and Hill, which doesn't mean anything to any of you, but it's on a major corridor in the city that literally thousands of cars pass every day, and it has this beautiful wildflower garden now. And this is actually another picture of the same lot, and we put up a few signs. We didn't do them on every single lot that we restored, but on some of them we put up signs so that residents would understand what was going on that lot. And in some of these lots, they do get a little taller, which is why we've kind of refined our technique over time. We now have two approaches. In areas where the community faces a bit more vacancy, we do treatment similar to what you see in the picture, which we call our traditional wildflower approach. And then in areas where it's a bit more populated, we have more of that missing tooth effect, where there's maybe one or two vacant lots in what otherwise is a stable block of occupied homes. We'll do a low mow or no mow lawn approach, or a flowering bee lawn is what it's sometimes called. And it's a different seed mix that stays significantly shorter. It doesn't bloom quite like this, but still provides some pollinator benefit, but it has a bit more intentional manicured approach that residents seem to be a bit more happy with when they're living next to it. This, although it looks nice when it's in bloom, one of the feedback we got from residents is when it's not in bloom, sometimes they had a hard time telling the difference between the wildflower meadow that we had reseeded onto the lot and some of the overgrowth and weeds that were there before. The other piece with maintenance of these lots is the City of Saginaw tree crews. They don't remove any down timber on any of their vacant lots either. The only timber that's removed by the Saginaw street crews would be from their street trees. So those trees that are planted in the median in that right of way are the only trees that do any sort of trimming on. So once a home's been demolished, if there's a big maple tree in the back of that lot that gets struck by lightning and falls across the lot, there's nobody there to take care of that tree at all. So that's been another piece of our work on the pollinator project, is to take care of some of those things. The unique thing about this project is the scale, I think, at which we work. So as Zach mentioned, there's approximately 3,000 vacant lots in the city right now where they've taken down the home and the lot is truly vacant. That green square represents what that looks like in terms of, if you aggregate all those parcels together, that green square represents the scale of what we're talking about here. Well, several years ago, we had this crazy idea. Well, we'll do something positive on half the vacant property in the city, and it was kind of a crazy goal, and I'll tell you, as the person that manages it, it is a crazy goal, but we're working through it. One thing I guess I'll say about specifically the pollinator project approach is this is not a major transformation to the landscape. It is performing some of those basic kind of municipal type activities on lots that are otherwise neglected. So in that way, it is kind of bringing that social equity piece into it. Most of the vacant property exists primarily in neighborhoods that are primarily minority communities, or communities that have very few owner-occupied homes. So they are communities that definitely do not see the same type of municipal involvement and municipal care as as potentially the west side of the river gets. So just based on the fact that most of the vacant property is on the east side of the river, that's where our team spends most of its time. So this kind of just shows you where we've been. We started out in 2016 with a pilot where we took about 30 lots across the city and really just kind of tested things out, tried to see what sort of seed mixes we could get to work, tried to see, what the community feedback was to this type of work. Did they like it? Did they care? And we took what we learned from that. We took the good things that we learned from that. We refined some of the things that didn't go so well, and we started to amp up our approach and start to work at scale. So that was 2017. At this point, we still didn't hire on a big seasonal crew. It was mainly 2 or 3 people with some contractors and some equipment doing that work across the city. And then in 2018, we continued to ramp up. This was when we added some staff and really started to bring in more partners as far as volunteers and others. One of the biggest relationships we developed that allowed us to scale up in this way was our partnership with the First Ward Community Center. And they have one of the Civilian Conservation Corps programs called the DNR Summer Youth Employment Program. And this is a program by which they hire local youth to work in the outdoors. And with that, we had a team of 40 Saginaw youth and their leader, Rob Brown, to help us with this type of work. He was an early adopter of the work we were doing. He continues to be a big partner, and his team has helped us out the last 2 seasons now, and they've made a big impact. The other main change that we've made is corporate volunteers have really started to creep up. So early on, we held a few public volunteer opportunities where people from the community could come out and help us and so on. We definitely still do that, but we really kind of made it our bread and butter to engage our corporate community. They were contributing to the project financially, and there was an interest for them to also contribute to this project in sweat equity too. So we were able to get a lot of local business people and employees out on some of the vacant property, helping us do the hardest part of the work, which is removing the trash and debris so that all those other positive things we want to do can happen. Like I said, we're a full-time staff of 4. Affecting some sort of positive change on half the vacant property in the city is not possible without partners. So that has been key to this project being as successful as it has been. Truthfully, this project has kind of been a low-hanging fruit in that we didn't really have anywhere to go but up. So there wasn't a lot of positive things happening on the vacant property in Saginaw. Saginaw does not have a clean and green type program. They don't have a very organized side lot purchase program. They, mow to own and some of these other programs that you hear about in other that are managed by other land banks. None of those exist here. So the fact that any group was trying to activate a team of volunteers to even just remove the down logs and cut the grass, for most of the residents, that's seen as a win. So the fact that we're doing that extra step to install, beautiful wildflowers or replant and reseed the lot and kind of reset it into a state that a neighbor could maintain it, that's seen as a big win, even if the wildflower meadow doesn't grow in exactly as we wish it would. Couple other things, as far as numbers, our staff has personally set foot on close to 1,900 of those 3,000 vacant lots so far. That's, us assessing the lot, seeing how it may fit into our program, and then, because not all lots are good candidates for this type of work. Some of them are former parking lot sites where maybe we do the cleanup portion, but we're not able to do the full conversion. Some of the sites, require heavy equipment and things like that to make this work possible. So, but we've set foot on, about 2/3 of the vacant property, and we've fully converted right about 1,000 lots so far. So we're pretty far along toward our goal. We've got almost 1,200 lots where we've at least started some aspect of this project. So here's a few pictures just of kind of what this looks like. One of the other key pieces is integrating the neighborhoods. So what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to come in, like Zach said, and just do something without respect for what the local community wants. So in almost every single one of our work days or volunteer days, somebody will step out of their house and just kind of see what's going on, or they'll jump in and start, picking up liquor bottles with us or whatever it may be. And those have been some of the most meaningful parts of this. So, we could quote stats about how many thousands of pounds of trash we've removed from the landscape, and all that's important, especially with, this community's proximity to a major body of water like the Saginaw River, which then flows into the Saginaw Bay and Lake Huron. That's where this community and many other communities in Michigan draw their water from. So there's definitely a vested environmental interest in this type of work. But the community impact and, having that resident, stop by and just thank our crew for, because they haven't seen anybody do anything positive on that lot 15, 20 years. They've seen people dump mattresses and all kinds of other terrible things on that lot. So those stories have been kind of some of the most impactful. We formed some close relationships with a lot of the neighborhood association team and their organized neighborhood groups. One in particular in the Houghton Jones neighborhood, Mr. Gary Dawkins, he's the neighborhood association president. He's become a big fan of the organization, and 3 years ago he had no idea we existed. So we've made some inroads with a population that had no idea who we were as an organization. So it's really helped us grow in that standpoint. This is actually interesting because you'll see on the side of the trailer it says Bay City. So we've had on 2 or 3 occasions now, we've actually had municipal staff from Bay City that volunteer, and the city manager of Bay City gives them permission during a work day to bring Bay City equipment into Saginaw to help us with this type of work. So I think that speaks to how this community as a region, they care about each other as far as the different smaller cities in the region, and they're willing to help each other out even from that standpoint. This is one of our most recent cleanups with a big group from Dow. The global chemical company Dow is right in our backyard. Their global headquarters is about 20 minutes or so from Saginaw. And globally, they've been putting several $1 billion into keeping plastics out of the ocean and just removing trash from the landscape. And this kind of hit at a key time for us because they also said, well, if we're investing all this money and all this volunteer capital internationally at doing this type of work, well, what are we doing locally? So we were able to leverage a lot of support from Dow in terms of both finances and volunteers over this last year to really help us make a big impact. This particular lot that they're on, so far we've removed 4 30-yard dumpsters from that one parcel. It was just a huge, huge dumping ground that had been neglected for a couple decades and really had not had anyone go in there and do the heavy lift to clean out the trash. So now we're nearly done with that, and we're hopeful that across the street from this, which you'll see in the next picture, is the Potter Street Station. This is the largest train station in Michigan north of Detroit, and it was one of those historic, passenger depots, and basically connected all of anything in Michigan north to the southern part of the state and then out of state as far as rail travel in the early 20th century. This lot's directly across from the train station, and there's a preservation group that's fighting the good fight to try and restore that building to its former glory and kind of make something positive happen there. So we're hopeful that that can happen. We're hopeful that our work in this community will help continue to push things in the right direction. Just a few more pictures on some of the stuff. as an environmental organization, we try not to send every single thing we pick up to the landfill. Our goal is to recycle what we can. It's tough at the scale we're working. It would be a heck of a lot easier just to throw all those tires in the dumpster, but we do our best when we can to pull out materials that can be recycled and get them, routed appropriately so that they don't have to end up in the landfill with everything else. We recycle a lot of scrap metal too. Let me see here. I think as far as that goes, those are the main, I guess, things that that we wanted to cover. I guess it's worth reiterating, because of our organization as a traditional land trust, we definitely do have a long game approach with this type of work. We definitely understand that the problems or the issues that created the problem we face in Saginaw, they didn't happen over a short period of time, and they're definitely not going to be corrected over a short period of time too. So we definitely have a long view approach with this, and we're definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. We plan to continue this work for the foreseeable future, and blight remediation, vacant land cleanup is definitely part of our portfolio of work. I think from now forward.
Yeah, and so we wanted to come in and answer a few questions. We've got a couple that have come in, and I wanted to address those and kind of explore a few different areas that maybe we didn't touch in the presentation. I would encourage anybody to throw any more questions on the fire. You can add them in your little right-hand column there, and we'll get those, and we'll be happy to address those. One of the comments, and this is a question that we get a lot locally, is what are we doing to prevent illegal dumping after we've cleaned it up in the wildflower beds? Because especially, well, in this particular question, Annabelle asked, how do you prevent dumping with wildflowers since they're a similar length to weeds? Does the sign do enough? Well, we did mention that, a lot of the wildflowers do grow taller. They're definitely not anywhere near as tall as what was there before. You could see in that photograph a couple of slides ago with a gentleman from Bay City on the bend track that the tall grasses and everything they go well above his head. So, I mean, you're talking about 6-7 foot tall vegetation. The wildflowers grow about 2 feet. So they're definitely different. But, when we mentioned that there's some confusion over what they might be, they could be perceived as weeds. They're just sort of green and shaggy. Ted had mentioned that in the interim, after that first year in the pilot, we started to develop the low grow approach and use a mix of ground vegetation that doesn't really grow over about 8 inches. And that's the predominant approach we take now. A lot of that stuff has been planted for the first time this year, so we don't have a lot of good mature images of that yet. But we've had some success on some pilot sites. So to answer your question, though, Annabelle, how do we prevent dumping? Well, first of all, the dumping does go down significantly after we've been through these neighborhoods, because the idea is that we're not picking off 1 lot or 2 lots. We're trying to attack basically a whole neighborhood. So we're dealing with, what we're doing is isolating areas of town where we can do a whole lot of work in a big area all at one time. So instead of doing 1 lot here, 1 lot there, we're addressing all the vacant land in about, 8 or 10 different areas around the city, in highly visible areas and in the areas of the absolute most need. So when we go through and we do like all 400 lots, in the whole Northeast area, for instance, illegal dumping does go down because now there's much higher visibility throughout the community. You don't have obscured vision on the corners anymore. It's much harder for bad guys to hide and to get away with it. And the neighbors that are there, can really keep an eye on things much more. And also, just your illegal dumping sticks out like a sore thumb when everything is, the vegetation is so much lower around you. And also just it's easy to see people doing it. Not to say that it doesn't happen. That does hit on a quick point, though. When you're the last remaining home on a block of what used to be 20 homes and you're surrounded by 7 foot tall vegetation, you were essentially totally isolated from the rest of your community. And one of the things I mentioned at the beginning was how this evolved for us from an environmental project really into an environmental justice and social equity project. And we like to look at that as now, what we're doing is opening those vision corridors back up when we're reconnecting these isolated populations back with the community around them. If you were going on a major corridor, like in Saginaw, it'd be Washington Avenue, past the Northeast area, you basically were looking at a 7 foot tall, wall of weeds and vegetation for a mile. Now that's all down and mowed and it's much less obnoxious than it was, and now you can actually see penetrating back into that neighborhood, and you learn quite a bit about the neighborhood there, and those people are realizing a new connection. We do a couple of other things too. We do some remediation measures for illegal dumping. We'll put bollards in, just 4x4 bollards, sink them into the ground, and that kind of, we haven't had illegal dumping again on sites where we do that. Any little obstacle we can put in place to prevent illegal dumping has actually helped, but you're not going to totally eradicate it. But just like with vandalism on our permanently protected properties, how do we address it? Is we clean it up right away. The quicker we clean it up, the less likely it is to reoccur. So what we're doing is essentially kind of sweeping all the bad illegal dumping into a few neighborhoods in town, and then local enforcement has a little easier time kind of identifying and going after those. That's the objective there.
The other piece to the illegal dumping is in a lot of cases, there hasn't been anyone that's cleaned up the illegal dumping on these lots in a decade or more. So, removing 10 to 20 years worth of trash from a lot, it doesn't just show back up the next day. So even though we do have some repeat offenders where illegal dumping happens, the neighborhoods look markedly better after we've been through and done this work than they did when we started.
Mm-hmm. A couple other questions. Is the BACF a local grant? Yeah, that's the Bay Area Community Foundation. So yeah, my apologies for not identifying that in the beginning. That $100,000 grant came from the Bay Area Community Foundation. That $100,000 grant opportunity was because of the bequest of a family where the matriarch had passed away and had left her family's fortune at charities around the country, but they had originally had ties here and left that money there. So the BACF, the Bay Area Community Foundation, had made a determination to invest that. And that kind of brings up another term, which is this other question about funding. How do we pay for this? Well, it's a very broad umbrella of funding. Everything from the land bank itself does contribute to the tune of about $55,000 a year to us. So that's about a third of our annual budget to conduct this effort. A good chunk of it comes from the Saginaw Community Foundation up until the end of next year. That's about $25,000 a year for over 3 years they did that, so a $75,000 commitment. That's the Saginaw Community Foundation. The rest of it essentially comes from the business community. So there is a car dealer in town here that owns about 14 dealerships around the country, the Garber Automotive Group, and Richard Garber, who is the third generation owner of that company, has made his personal decisions to, base his company on the east side of Saginaw, build new construction Class A office space on the east side of Saginaw, and has made a personal deep dive commitment to the city of Saginaw. And he took an interest in our project and led the charge with mustering support from his colleagues in the business community. So we've had, Huntington Bank is a large donor, approximately $30,000 a year goes into the project. And then a collection of other organizations, probably from the $5,000 to $10,000 annual range. That nets us about $70-some more thousand a year from the business community. So right now it comes from all those. And then, of course, tremendous volunteer support and individual donations. So this is a very diverse program. You notice I didn't mention Dow in there, but Ted did mention that Dow is offering financial support. Well, that's new this year. They started to offer tremendous volunteer support because after their recent separation from DuPont, they had merged with them and then separated again, and they became just Dow in a new form. They, as a core principle of their new company, basically addressing the plastics problem in the world, because they are, of course, a large manufacturer of plastics, and because their sort of license to operate in the public eye depends on the fact that they don't continue to contribute to some of the most pressing environmental problems in the world. And this is the leadership that they've shown recently, is that they want to be part of the solution through both science, but also through direct action and investment. So we're in the process of kind of negotiating their financial support over the next few years, but they are definitely on board and helping us out. Another question from Wayne: what are the opportunities and barriers to scaling this up to other land banks and conservancies around the state? Well, first and foremost, I think the biggest barrier is sort of changing minds, attitudes, and hearts about what an environmental organization like ours can and should do. Sort of a lot of our conventional donors, supporters, and colleagues have sort of looked askance at us and said, well, is that scope creep? What are you doing? That's why we addressed it in our strategic plan and sort of grew our strategic plan and our mandate to include sort of elevating this landscapes for all and identifying benefits of people in our mission statement. I think that's the biggest thing is, showing leadership by taking a risk and naturally putting together the funding. And that took a long time. You know, like Ted had mentioned, we did a pilot and then a scale up, and then we ultimately started in earnest in our third year of doing this work, because it took a long time to bring people along. So I would say that that's that. Now, in our case, you know, the Saginaw County Land Bank had a huge land obligation, but not a lot of capacity to address the maintenance requirements of that land. So they were looking for a lower maintenance solution. And by all accounts, what we put in after we remove all the debris and vegetation is lower maintenance than you know, trying to keep it mowed like turf grass, because nobody's happy when you try to mow turf grass. You can't do it enough to keep the grass down, and when you do, you know, do it infrequently, then you end up with a lot of biomass left on the site. So yeah, that's kind of what went on there. The land bank was looking for a solution, and we were looking for a problem to tackle, and that's where that kind of marriage came in. I would say that some of the land banks that are far more resourced might look at this as one of many solutions to their vacant land issue. You know, we've had a lot of great correspondence and enjoyed a fun relationship with the Genesee County Land Bank and with individuals down in Detroit and in Ingham County and some other places. And, you know, some of those land banks, they do have more resources and professional staff, and they've got a tremendous number of exciting programs. Again, though, our approach is a mile wide and an inch deep versus in a lot of those cases, you're looking at something more that's, you know, you'd say is a mile deep and an inch wide, putting a lot of resources into a smaller amount of lots, where we're putting a minimal amount of resources into as many lots as possible. So I think that's what differentiates our project from a lot of others. And we believe that, you know, there's certainly an opportunity for some of even the more well-resourced land banks to either work with us or adopt some of this methodology to be one of many solutions that they have available to them to deal with the vacant land issues in their community. So there's certainly opportunity there. But all those things, you know, incremental growth, funding, attitudes and minds, identifying the problem, you know, there's a lot of things that go into you know, getting this thing going. So those are certainly some barriers, but you know, it's a relatively low cost treatment. It ends up being, you know, less than $1,000 per lot essentially to get them initially converted. So that's a barrier, but it's not such a significant barrier that it can't be overcome. Overall, you know, over this 5-year effort, we will have spent less than $500,000. So, you know, when you're dealing with land banks that are dealing in the millions of dollars worth of resources, it's a relatively small project. So that's that. Looking at the time here, I think that's going to be our last question, unless anybody else has any others that pop in there. I'm going to turn that back over to Justin there, and thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to make this presentation. We enjoyed it, and we've enjoyed getting to know people in the community surrounding the Center for Community Progress. So thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. This is Justin. I just want to first say thank you to Zachary and Ted for an excellent presentation. I also want to let everyone know that our next webinar will be November 21st, so we hope that you can join us for the next Cornerstone webinar. And that if you have any questions or want more information on our Cornerstone webinars, please visit our website to access that. And there's a page in the online education section where you can learn more about this and see past recordings. Thanks, and have a great afternoon, everyone.